Within the Common Core standards, we have a breakdown of text by grade level. Here we can see in the K5 that we should have a 50-50 distribution of literary text as well as informational text. As we go into the higher grades, 6-12, in 8th grade we see that we should have 45% being literary text and 55% being informational text. As we progress into the highest grades, so what students should be focusing on upon graduation includes 30% of literary text and 70% of the informational text. This coincides with one of the major instructional ELA shifts, where we should be placing increasing emphasis on informational text to build content knowledge through the grades. Here is a look at literary versus informational text from the Smarter Balance Assessment's item specification document. Literary texts are described as stories, which includes the subgenres of adventure stories, historical fiction, mysteries, myths, science fiction, realistic fiction, etc. This also includes drama, such as one-act and multiple-act plays, both written from and on film. Thirdly, poetry. This includes the subgenres of narrative poems, lyrical poems, free verse poems, sonnets, odes, ballads, and epics. For the informational section, this includes literary nonfiction such as exposition, argument, and functional text in the form of personal essays, speeches, opinion pieces, essays about art or literature, biographies, memoirs, journalism, and historical, scientific, technical, or economic accounts, including digital sources, written for a broad audience. Here's a more succinct and concise version of what is literary nonfiction. The interesting thing about informational text is there's not one consistent definition. Different sources consider different types of text to be informational. In general, there are two categories: literary nonfiction and content-specific text. The Common Core and Smarter Balance include literary nonfiction, biographies, historical nonfiction, and memoirs in informational text. Many other sources do not. The list of content-specific texts are generally agreed upon and are all considered informational texts by the Common Core and Smarter Balance. With the breakdown of writing, NAEP likewise outlines a distribution across the grades of the core purposes and types of student writing. The 2011 NAEP framework, like the standards, cultivates the development of three mutually reinforcing writing capacities: writing to persuade, to explain, and to convey real or imagined experience. Evidence concerning the demands of college and career readiness gathered during the development of the standards concurs with NAEP's shifting emphasis for grades 9-12 to describe writing in all three forms, but consistent with NAEP, the overwhelming focus of writing throughout high school should be on arguments and informative and explanatory texts. It follows that writing assessments aligned with the standards should adhere to the distribution of writing purposes across grades outlined in NAEP. Here we can see by grade level the emphasis that should be placed on writing to persuade, writing to explain, and writing for personal narrative. The Common Core state standards aim to align instruction with the NAEP framework so that many more students than at present can meet the requirements of college and career readiness. If we do a comparison of informational text on the NAEP versus the Montana CRT assessment, we can see the emphasis placed on literary text versus informational text by grade. If we look at the CRT, historically speaking, it was a 50-50 distribution of literary versus informational text. If we look at the NAEP 2011 framework, we can see that it is in agreement with the Common Core standards and the Smarter Balance assessment, where as we increase in grade level, we increase in our expectation to have more emphasis placed on informational text. Here's an exercise that you will do and compare your responses in the discussion forum for these three aspects. This information was taken from Sarah Brown Westling's Supporting Students in the Time of the Common Core. So frames that build. Here's an exercise to interpret the Common Core standards for English language arts. We will walk through reading the standards, Activity 1, looking at text exemplars and sample performance tasks, Activity 2, and weighing classroom decisions, Activity 3. Please take a couple of minutes to answer the questions under each activity. Activity 1, reading the standards. Read the reading standards, looking for the verbs. What is it that students should be able to do as they read? What patterns do you notice in these verbs? Do they coalesce in dispositions for thinking? Here's an example of an informational reading standard. Determine a central idea of text and how it is conveyed through particular details. Provide a summary of the text distinct from personal opinions or judgments. Here are some verbs that are found underneath this standard. Take a moment to read through the reading standards, and as you look at the reading standards for your grade of choice, write down, what do these students know? What can these students do? You may use verbs like found under this umbrella for this standard to help you describe and articulate what mental processing students must have in order to understand the content and what actions or skills they need to exemplify in order to demonstrate proficiency of the standard. Please take 5 minutes to go through at least 3 of the standards. For Activity 2, we're going to look at text exemplars and sample performance tasks. Download Appendix B of the Common Core Standards, which is the text exemplars and sample performance tasks. Choose at least one text and task exemplar for your grade of choice. Answer these questions as you work through the text and task. What do you notice about how the questions are written? What kind of skills do the questions focus on? What about the questions resonates with the language of the standards? For illustrative purposes, sample performance task for informational text on page 76 was chosen. This is, students should determine the main idea of Colin Ronan's telescopes and create a summary by explaining how key details support his distinctions regarding different types of telescopes. Please take at least 5 minutes to work through this one task and task exemplar. You may work at your own pace, and you may choose more text and task types. Activity 3, Weighing Classroom Decisions. Considering your inquiry into the standards and corresponding exemplars, what implications to classroom practices emerge? Which skills would you elevate for the different texts you read? What language would make it into your assessment tools? How might you focus on concepts versus topics to inform your instructional design? Here's an example from the Unpacking the Standards by North Carolina, where teachers unpack the standards. They identified the nouns and the verbs. They considered Bloom's taxonomy. They identified key academic vocabulary. They reviewed what was taught and assessed in the grades and courses before and after. They considered the knowledge, skills needed to master the content of each of the standards. The purpose of this tool, and for unpacking the standards, was to give a visual representation to assist the student in organizing abstract big picture information that is new, overwhelming, or misunderstood. By providing these examples, OPI is creating a foundation for teachers to shift the focus from merely classroom instruction to also student learning. This instructional tool uses straightforward, clear model examples that can be used in the classroom in alignment with the new standards. The tool speaks directly to the teachers and holds high expectations for teachers' ability to understand the use of the tool as a mechanism for differentiating instruction. So here in the unpacking section, we can see what is recommended for a 4th grader. So 4th grade students should refer to the text when drawing conclusion as well as when answering directly stated questions. The central message or lesson is now referred to as a theme, a unifying idea that is a recurrent element in literary or artistic work. Students are continued to determine a theme and expanding this work to other genres. They are required to refer to the text to describe various story elements. Teachers should use question and prompts such as, what are the most important events that happened in the story? Can you give specific examples from the text to support your thinking?